All right, thank you, Melissa, and thanks everyone for attending my discussion today on AIOps, what it is, and what it means to Gap. Here's my agenda that I have prepared for today. I'm going to give a brief intro so you know a little bit about the speaker and some of my views on where I come from as far as leading to this presentation. I'm going to do my best at the definition of AIOps. It's a pretty nebulous and vague topic in the industry. It means different things to different people. I'm going to look at the market and whether or not it's a real valid play or there's a lot of marketing hype behind that would be good to know. We're going to talk about real world applications and any possible use cases for AIOps. And then I'm going to give you a strong point of view. And that's going to be a little very opinionated Dave opinions based on my experience in this space. And then finally, we're going to go through considerations for Gap, things that I'm going to recommend for us to focus on. And then we'll finish it up with Q&A from anybody that has any. All right, so who is this guy? I'm Gap's Chief Innovation Officer. I joined last September, so I'm going on almost a year now in a few months. I'm a career software engineer. I am a practitioner and a programmer to this day. So I prefer to remain very technical in my role, and I've done that throughout my career. I've worked in multiple industries. I started in the petroleum industry in Houston. I moved then into enterprise software where I worked over a decade. I did a few startups. I've been a consultant. I've worked over a decade in gaming, making AAA titles for Electronic Arts with multiple millions of concurrent users for a single application. I've gone from on-prem to public cloud. Most of my experience is with AWS, although I have some Azure and some IBM Cloud under my belt. I've gone from monolithic applications and microservices, non-containers to containers, containers to serverless. I've gone from a team, managing a team that had no DevOps to DevOps to DevSecOps, and all in with that kind of a strategy. I've gone from dedicated QA resources to more of a shift left paradigm where more of that onus is put on development teams. I've gone from no automation to automate everything, from little data to big. And one that I should have probably put earlier, but this bullet here is second to the end, heavy experience in machine learning, which is going to come into play here. So specifically TensorFlow, Amazon machine learning on AWS, and SageMaker. And I've been a frequent speaker at technical conferences all before the big COVID hit where we actually had conferences in person. Over here, I most recently joined from IBM, where I advised clients on really strategic technology issues that they were facing. And before that, over a decade of Electronic Arts, making some games. So that's a little bit about me and where I'll be coming from with some of these opinions that I'm going to be talking about. Okay, the goal of AIOps is to enhance the quality of ingested data so IT leaders can drive multiple use cases relevant to a practice or persona. So the key things in this goal are: one, it's IT leaders, and two, it's use cases relevant to a practice or a persona. So specifically for a DevOps person or for a system administrator or for whatever persona is trying to solve a specific problem. That is what the industry perceives as the goal of AIOps, which is going to be the kind of the foundation for the rest of this presentation. So the main functions of an AIOps platform include, first of all, ingestion. And we have multiple forms of ingestion here. One is real-time streaming data analytics, whether or not it's the stock market or game events or things like that. Those are more on the application side. But keep in mind, on the ops perspective, we're talking about system events that are really related to the events that are showing the health or non-health of our applications and machines and VMs and all that. It also has historical data analysis. So if I have large jobs that load a lot of historical data that I can use in my platform to crunch that and generate insights from, that's great. The second is network and infrastructure topology. So that kind of a mapping of my entire infrastructure. This is probably more of an on-prem thing than a public cloud thing, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. The next one is correlation, the ability to relate events to others and generate some root cause analysis. And finally, the end goal of all this is to have some remediation, some solutions, and automated recovery actions to things that might occur, especially from a systems and operations perspective. So AI is very broad. There are people in Gap that I'm very impressed with that know a lot more about data science and machine learning and artificial intelligence than I do. So when I think of AI, I start asking, are we talking about genetic algorithms? Are we talking about neural networks? The answer to that in the case of AIOps is no. The vast majority of AI that they are referring to in AI ops is machine learning. That is if, and I have a if capitalized here, if they leverage any AI at all. Some of the vendors and the products that they'll have an AI in their marketing name, and it is marketing, and there's no real AI in there at all. So we'll talk about that. But for the ones that do have it, it's mainly machine learning is what we're going to focus on today. Here's a good quote from Carnegie Mellon with Alan Turing. Some would consider the following, or the father of machine learning. What we want is a machine that can learn from experience. And that's what we're talking about here, is having data sets that we learn from and that we get smarter over time by processing large, very large amounts of data. This graphic here, I'd like to walk through this. This comes from Gartner, and I found as the best reference to a high-level picture of what's going on in the AIOps world. Over on the left here in the light blue, we have observe and monitoring. And so here we have, like we were talking about, real-time and historical data that's coming in. The sources of these are things like logs, event traces, topology, the topology map that we talked about earlier. Next, we have the historical data. That could be an input as well. Next, we're going to have anomaly detection. Hey, based on everything that's happened in the past, this thing that happened now is a little bit different, or maybe a lot different than other things that have occurred before. Therefore, I'm going to alert on this. Next, performance analysis. And finally, correlation and context to all this massive data that's going to lead to, hopefully, a solution. So that flows over in here into the engage, ITSM, which stands for IT service monitoring, incidences, dependencies, changes, these things that are typical in like help desk type solutions. Here we're talking about task automation, whether or not it's using automated tools from some of the popular vendors or not. Change risk analysis, to be able to do an assessment of a change based on what they determine as the risk, the appetite for risk for that change. Agent performance analysis, knowledge management. There's a lot that goes into the engage flow of the circle here for AIOps. And then finally, there's the act. So you have the data, you have the engage with the data, and then you have the act. And that might be a solution that involves running a script, running specific run books, performing some ARA, which is app release automation. And that is the circle of the AIOps flow. Right in the middle is machine learning and big data platform. Now, one of the things that I experienced in my career as a person that has written some tools that did these kinds of things, and two, a person responsible for keeping systems up and healthy, is that very few people are comfortable with this automatic resolution thing. Uh, I I and others prefer more of tell me what you think I should do, then I can approve that. But I feel very uncomfortable with some software product automatically handling some really critical things that could go the wrong way. So this is going to be a constant challenge and a hurdle for any of the vendors that are in the AI ops space that say they can do some real-time acting and automation of solutions. If you look at the future of AI assisted automation, you have on the left here, we're going to start. And then here you start with what's known. And there's nothing in this slide I think anybody would say is new or revolutionary. This is the way we've been doing this for a while. It's good to see that this is all hashed out here in a nice, easy flow. But you start with what you know, and then you classify problems into categories. We've been doing this kind of segmentation for years. There's nothing new about this, especially when it comes to AI ops, except maybe now it's directed at the operations space instead of things that weren't directed at that before. Then you match current with historical. Once you've created these problems, you segmented problems into categories, then you match current data with something that would fit into that category. So we've identified this potential problem based on all this historical information and segmentation. You go from that to you suggest a set of solutions with possibilities or with probabilities of success, which is great. And then you run that solution or not, and you track its effectiveness and you give it a thumbs up or a thumbs down. And the idea is that this process gets smarter and smarter and smarter as you go, to the point where you feel things that used to be a big problem now become routine. But as I said earlier, this flow is nothing new except the application of this flow to the ops space. Data sources for AI ops. First of all, logs are gold. And this is not unique to AI ops. This is a statement, a general statement. Logs are used for all sorts of problem diagnostics, and they are probably the most important data source for AI ops. Next, you have AI APIs, which typically are going to result in logs from API requests. Next, you have events. It could be, server went down, or we maxed out memory on this VM, or we peaked out on the number of users that are using this instance, things like that. Those are a very critical input for data sources. We also have application data, but I put this in red because, like, hey, I thought we were talking about operations. I mean, nobody's questioning the validity of using AI on application data. We've been doing that for a long time. But this is more about correlating application data to the operation side of things. So let's say that every time we use a gaming example, let's say every time somebody goes from level 11 to level 12, 3 servers crash. If we were just looking at it from, hey, 3 servers crash often, that would be one thing. But to be able to correlate that to, hey, that occurs when a player levels up from 11 to 12. So that's a useful thing, especially for event correlation. Next, we have traces. So the real-time tracing of distributed systems is really critical, especially if we're going to be able to manage things from end to end, especially. And then finally, metrics. So how am I doing as far as CPU, response time, things like that. Some of the key metrics over time, they're going to feed our AI engine and provide these kind of insights that we're looking for in AI ops. But there's a big difference. between application data and data use for monitoring the health of systems. And I wanted to clarify that because it's going to lead to a strong point of view here in a few slides. But that is used in AIOps to correlate app data to system events. So that's the thing, is that we're going to talk about some application data, but it's only used in the correlation of that to system events. Best use cases for AIOps. Anything that would benefit from the following: digesting large amounts of systems data. We're talking millions of events per minute. Well, first of all, you have to be a pretty big shop to have any application that's doing millions of events per minute, especially when these events are typically system related events around infrastructure. Two, anomaly detection. Something that we have our segments and we recognize that this is out of bounds of what we would consider normal behavior. Three, I want to correlate events. And this is usually dealing with data sets that are larger than I can process or be able to handle with typical tools like in a database with SQL and stuff like that. It's overwhelmed very quickly. I have billions of them and I cannot correlate this. And I'm not smart enough as a human being to make these judgments on what correlates to what, which we know is the sweet spot for machine learning. Root cause analysis, always one of the key insights and deliverables from a real usage of AI. And then finally, reduction in false alarms. I think whether or not it's a ticketing system or any kind of monitoring system, I think the amount of false alarms that you can reduce is a really big advantage to preventing that kind of noise and keeping people productive. So those are the best use cases for AIOps, in my opinion, and that I could find with any research whatsoever. Let's talk about the market. So Gartner says the market size for AIOps is between 900 million and 1.5 billion in 2020, with an annual growth rate of 15%. That's okay. I mean, that's right at $1 billion now. So, not terribly huge, but not small either. They also say the adoption is heavily influenced by two key areas. One is digital transformation, which is good for us because obviously, me and my current role at Gap, that's what I'm focused on. That's what most of my conversations I have with customers are about, which are digital transformation and how can they do some things and the art of the possible. And the other one is creating proactive responses to issues. This is more of a help desk type thing, like a virtual assistant that we're all familiar with. But that's more of probably an old school, I would not say a modern requirement these days, but the digital transformation one is. But I'm going to challenge that here in a few slides because you'll see why. Okay, so there's two types of vendors. If we look at the market and the vendor landscape, you have what they call a generic. These are not really domain focused vendors, so they just have solutions that are what would be known as generic AIOps. And these go everywhere from everyone from Big Panda on top to Sumo Logic on the bottom here. And I have some arrows to the left of 4 of them that I thought were worth talking about. BMC, by the way, I worked there for over a decade. These are the kind of products that I built when I worked there. And that was a long time ago. I'm not going to tell everybody how long ago that was. But they're still doing that stuff. And so they should be poised to really capture a large part of this market because this is their bread and butter. This is what they've always done. These types of things on how they keep systems performing and databases performing by using a lot of very fancy analytics capabilities. Next, ServiceNow. Since a lot of these AIOps things are directed at ticketing and help desk stuff, ServiceNow is a leader in that. So if they're going to be able to add some serious AI capabilities to that, then they are in a prime position to capitalize on this market. The next two, starting with Splunk. I don't know how many people on this meeting have used Splunk. I have. The good thing about it is it's very robust, and it's a great logging and log analysis tool. The bad thing about it is it's very expensive. And so for the people and the organizations that can afford it, they like it until they get the bill and the contracts for it, which are very high. But if Splunk were to, or they already have, for all I know, I don't know yet, but they are a leader in this category and they could take a large percentage of this market. And then finally on the bottom, Sumo Logic, kind of some people kind of portray it as a Splunk killer without the Splunk costs, and it's pretty powerful. I used that at EA quite a bit. I liked it. But these are the four that I think are really poised to kind of dominate this space if they do the right things. That's not to say the other ones won't. I'm not familiar with like Digitate here. Didn't do a lot of analysis on that, but I just know from experience and based on the market size and these company sizes, these are the ones that are really poised to take that. So these are the generic vendors in the landscape. And now let's look at what they call the domain-centric vendors. So here you have a few acronyms that are worth going over. ITSM, IT service monitoring. IM is infrastructure monitoring. NPMD, network performance monitoring and diagnostics. And then APM, app performance monitoring, which is the one I am most familiar with. And so I have two arrows by two vendors here. I think probably most of the people on this call have been exposed to Datadog. Pretty powerful tool, and they are in the APM space. If they were to add some AI capability that could do some of these correlation capabilities and have generate some of these insights, they are poised to do very well. And the other one that I have used extensively that I feel like I could write reviews for them that would generate future business for them, and that's New Relic. So I don't think they have much AI capability in there now. If they do, it's limited. But given the robustness of the rest of their platform, I think they are in a really good position to add this kind of capability to see where it goes. And so I'm familiar with a lot of these. Some of these I'm not, like Kentic, OverOps, Pico. I'm not familiar with those. I am Xenos, Science Logic, Vertana. But I think the big two to watch in this space are Datadog and New Relic. Okay, now let's get to the good part here. Warning, we got some strong opinions ahead, but I think this is the kind of the point of view that you're looking for and the insights generated from a lot of this research and experience. I'm going to start this part with how I tend to believe you succeed in problem solving. First, you fully understand the problem. I forget the actual saying, but a problem well defined is half solved or something like that. Could not be more true. So I've leveraged that the majority of my career, and I'm a strong believer in that. Next, you determine the best solution to that problem. And note that I have here, it may or may not include any artificial intelligence. There's a lot of problems that we can solve today that don't have any part of AI in them at all. And that's fine. It could be even more effective and less complicated not to have it in there if it will work. And then the third is being open-minded towards solutions. So the fact that there are a lot of ways to skin a cat, if I tend to have an open mind and to encourage debate and conversation about things that I probably wouldn't have done it that way, I think I've learned more in my career by taking that approach and learning new and better ways of doing something. So those are the three kind of big steps that I see in how to succeed in problem solving. Now we go to how to fail with DevOps. Number one, you're going to see some opposites here. One, you go looking for a problem with your AI toolbox. I think that's what we're seeing a lot of these AI vendors are doing is, they have a hammer and everything looks like a nail, and they're going to go looking for a problem for this. Two, you implement a complicated solution with no benefit and a long time to value. So customers care very deeply about what is my ROI going to be returned to me? Where do I see my time to value after I implement this thing? And if that number is either unknown or a long ways away, you're really facing an uphill battle on trying to sell something to any customer. I put myself in the customer shoes when I think of this. I wouldn't buy anything that has a payoff of many months or even possibly years away. Too many things can change between now and then to make that really worth it. And then three, you brag about how it uses AI. So I went looking for a problem with my AI toolbox. I don't have a real solution with a real benefit and it has a long time to value. And then I just brag about how cool it is because it uses artificial intelligence. That's how you fail. And I see it all the time. So machine learning, I'm a big fan. It is awesome for some things. First of all, let's talk about my experience in gaming. For you MMO players, gold farming is a big problem, and we won't go into the description of what that is. For the short story, for the non-massively multiplayer online games, it's a form of cheating by loading up accounts and selling gold, and it's complicated, but it's bad. Two, cheaters. We got really good at identifying cheaters in all EA games. And part of that was the fact that we knew we had historical data on what cheating looked like, just like the earlier slide showed. We created segments for that. And then we would have real-time data and we'd say, that looks like a cheater. That looks exactly like a cheater. And we're able to really reduce, in most cases, in most games, eliminate certain kinds of cheating altogether. Spammers, pretty hard to knock these out because they get really creative with putting in the messaging, URLs to go buy something here or get some fictional currency there, and they use leak speak and things like that. But we got to the point where if we identified a message that we considered spam, within 5 seconds, that player was kicked from the game and banned forever. And so pretty robust technology using machine learning. And then the next one was players likely to quit, likely to monetize. You can imagine that if you were a player and you were likely to quit and you were in that category, you would get special promotions from us that would do everything we could because we would know the things that would keep you going in the game. So that was all based on machine learning that really drove revenue for the game. Next, personal recommendations in books, music, things like that. I don't know about you, but I'm always amazed at some of the recommendations I get. And I'm like, yeah, that fits me perfectly based on all of my historical books I've purchased and music I've downloaded. They know a lot. It worked. And then things like anything with heavy statistical data like baseball, that's automatic slam dunk for machine learning. That's the total sweet spot for it. Things like which minor leaguers are likely to be major leaguers. That's a classic case of perfect sweet spot for machine learning. Deciding where to drill for oil. My first job at Texaco, I was using genetic algorithms to help find Texaco where to drill for oil. I was using AI before AI was cool. But that worked. It was very successful. So there's a lot of practical applications for this. And like I said, I'm a big fan, which is why I chose to use it a lot and I learned a lot about it. There's a long list, but you'll notice this is all application data, right? I didn't use it for operations. I didn't use it for managing databases. I didn't use it for managing CI/CD pipelines. None of that. It was all application data. So let's talk about it. What about for IT operations? This is what it's all about, AIOps, right? So the two big places that they keep focusing on for this are incident management and root cause analysis. So those two things are what they keep saying are the best scenarios in which case AIOps would be a player and would be something that companies need in their portfolio of solutions. Next, We have competition against open source. So you have Prometheus here, upper left. This is a time series database, open source product, really popular in the Kubernetes world. Then you have Jaeger, which is the end-to-end distributed tracing, which provides metrics that are critical for managing distributed applications. Then you have FluentD, which is the logging, the kind of like the new and improved version of Logstash, which is going to be pumping logs to a central place for analysis. And then finally, I think everybody on here is, most people on here have used Grafana, which is the open source dashboard for doing real-time visualizations that I've used it extensively. So the AIOps vendors have to deal with these pretty robust open source tools that, although they require being stitched together by companies that when they implement them, they do a lot of the similar type things. In some cases, it's identical. So this is an ongoing challenge for the vendors in the AIOps space. Next, vendor lock-in is big. So if you go with one of those solutions, whether or not it's BMC or IBM or New Relic, they're expensive and they're enterprise license deals. These are not metered SaaS-based solutions for the most part. And the enterprise license, for me, it's kind of old school. I haven't done one in a very long time, and I don't think I want to do another one because you're locked in. It makes it very difficult to change solutions. But then I have on the right, this is intentional by the vendors. There is no market pressure demanding an easy transfer of one vendor to another. So why would they be interested in making it easy to get off of their solution in favor of a competitor? They won't. They'll make it hard. So that's another thing that companies and tech leaders need to consider before they go into enterprise license deal for an AIOps deal, that you're going to be locked into this for quite some time unless you're just willing to forego your enterprise license deal and consider that money lost. Is this a solution looking for a problem? You guys can decide. I will give you my 2 cents on this. Are they trying to capitalize on the marketing hype? Are they trying to capitalize on the popularity of artificial intelligence these days? It must be good if it uses AI, and this is kind of belief that many people have about it because it's too complicated to figure out. It's all fancy magic stuff that happens back there. Are they capitalizing on that? Are customers just believing it without asking any details? Like, what specific AI do you have embedded in your secret sauce? Is it genetic algorithms? Is it neural nets? Is it machine learning, model training? What is it specifically that gives you an advantage to doing these things over your competitors? And then on the last bullet, I do know some vendor offerings are not doing well in the market. And then here I have an example. So, what is IBM Cloud Pak for Watson AIOps? Watson has a very good reputation for, kind of AI type stuff. And then it talks about the Cloud Pak. And then it says across IT ops toolchain, so you can confidently assess, diagnose, and resolve incidents across mission critical workloads. Well, that's interesting. The other interesting thing here is explainable AI. Anybody know what explainable AI is? That would be nice to know. But I can tell you, having worked there, that the level of AI that they have in this Cloud Pak for Watson AIOps is none. It's a marketing thing. It's SQL statements. So when you call them on that, I'm not here to throw IBM under the bus. I'm here to challenge vendors capitalizing on the AI hype. When you challenge them on, hey, I think we're going to get some customers that are going to really ask about what kind of AI we have in that solution. And the answer is it's more of a marketing thing. It's not a technical thing. Then they're going to have some uphill battles, because when customers are asking those difficult questions, it's going to be some uncomfortable moments for vendors like that. But wait, is this about keeping systems up and available? by looking at logs and generating insights and possibly remedies and actions to automatically address them and avoid problems in the future? Yes, it is, right? So then I ask everyone here, try thinking of specific scenarios in which AI is required to solve an ops problem. In my opinion, it's hard. And so when you do some Google research, you'll see what I'm talking about, because there's very few uh, uh, cases where people are validating that I could not live with this AIOps solution, because here's what it did for me. When you Google use cases for AIOps or success stories with AIOps or customer testimonials, you'll only get vendor ads for their AIOps solution. So it's light. And because when we put our hat on and we think about this ourselves, when I try thinking about what's a scenario in operations where I would require AI to solve that, I'm thinking for a while. I don't know. So that's when I have to ask others, what would you think is a scenario that required artificial intelligence to solve an ops problem? Good marketing strategies evangelize the problem. So whether or not it is Uber who evangelized how hard it was to hail a taxi, and then the ride sharing industry was born, or the numerous other examples of really successful marketing initiatives and product launches and industries, they always evangelize the problem. So I ask, what's the problem? What is the problem that they are evangelizing that cannot be solved without requiring additional artificial intelligence applied to my application logs or any of those other data sources? It doesn't matter. And in my opinion, AIOps vendors have not done a good job evangelizing the problem. All they talk about is their product, but they don't talk about what problems they're going to solve for me in a very specific way that I can relate to, that then I could say, okay, my time to value, I can understand that in my own organization based on the very specific problems that you're going to tell me that you're going to solve for me. They say they can help forecasting capacity for intelligent scaling. I tried not to laugh out loud when I read that was one of the core features of AI ops. And my response to that was, this problem has been solved long ago. The cloud providers do that for me automatically. Do they have AI built in there? I don't even care. They just do it. So whether or not it's the cloud providers or Kubernetes or Mesos or Docker Swarm, and the list goes on, having intelligent scaling, that nut has been cracked. That problem has been solved. So why would I go through an enterprise license deal for a very expensive and complicated piece of software that I have to install and manage to do that? I would not. What I've required using AIOps in my prior roles, I've led DevOps teams for many years, and I've built some applications that were used by people around the world. And the answer to that is no, I would not. In its current state, as well as the state of technology in the cloud and other modern technologies, I do not see how I would use it in any of my prior roles. Will I use it in a future role? Maybe. But what I'm sharing with you today is based on my track record of my experience, what I've been through and what I've done. I rewound the clock and I went back and I'm like, if I had a tool that did this, would it help me on that? And I can't find any cases where it would have, other than the traditional tools that we use to solve those problems. So then I'm going to go through a list here, and I say, and what about the fact that microservices are mainstream and there's no single point of failure in systems that we design today if they are designed right? You know, a lot of the AIOps strategy is about keeping things up and healthy, but that's old school mentality. That's not a modern architecture. We don't approach the problem like that nowadays. What about the fact that we build systems that auto kill unhealthy services instead of nursing them back to health? We don't need to care that it died. That's true. These are questions that I would ask of the AIOps industry. What about the fact that Kubernetes and other technologies already have this capability to keep things up? It's baked in. Desired state equals actual state. I tell Kubernetes I need 45 of these things always running. Kubernetes says, I got it. That's what I do. I don't care if Kubernetes lost 3 overnight and added 3 to keep it going. That's normal as far as I'm concerned. Things are going to die. They were developed and designed in a stateless way. So they could die or they could be killed and others pop up that are healthy. What about the fact that we have tools readily available to test our resiliency so we know how to make it work before we deploy it to production? I'm talking about things like Chaos Monkey from Netflix that will automatically unplug things and turn things off and break connections. And then you have to make sure that your application can withstand that. Very few can withstand Chaos Monkey, but in reality, not many applications would have to understand that, especially if you're doing an internal application for maybe a small departmental application. If you are doing something publicly facing, then absolutely being able to survive that by running those tools. My point here is that we have tools that can test our resiliency, and the AIOps approach, which is monitor things to try to keep them up, is a different and old school way of looking at the same problem. So how does AIOps help me if I have a modern architecture? And that's where I have the graphic on the left of the guy saying, no thanks, I'm good. That's a valid question. So I'm going to make a case for AIOps, and then I'm going to make a case against it. And then I'm going to talk about, in my opinion, what it means to Gap. First of all, the case for AIOps, this is big company stuff. If I worked for an AIOps vendor and they said, hey, you need to go and talk to customers and get people to adopt our product, I would go to like Citibank, United Airlines, Nike, Procter & Gamble, big companies with a lot of legacy systems that are on-prem that maybe are not in the cloud yet, that are focused on keeping things up and running, that are not modern architectures. That's first. Next, that they would not be interested in SaaS applications. You go to some more modern and smaller companies, you say, hey, I have a solution for you, but you're going to have to install and manage this. They're like, get out of here. We don't do that. We do metered stuff. We use SaaS apps. So I'll pay for what I use, and if I don't use it much, I won't pay anything at all. And that's kind of like the way to go now. So the case is they would have to be, in this case, the case for AIOps, interested in installing software and manage it themselves. Another scenario is they have too much systems data to process, that whether or not it's SQL and the databases are too big, maybe have billions of events per day, things like that, that they need this kind of capability for legacy data that is just too much. And then finally, they have very specific scenarios that hopefully those align to what the AIOps vendor says they can resolve, that they need to address. And maybe it's the virtual assistant. Maybe it's something with reducing the false alarms on system problems, things like that. If they had very specific scenarios to address, then I could make the case for having an AIOps tool. The case against it. The concept of AIOps has yet to mature. That even Gartner would agree with that. This thing is kind of evolving as we're going. A lot of people are vying for position. They don't exactly know what to put in their products. They're not sure what types of AI they should put in there, if any. The problem domain has not been evangelized. That to me is like the biggest thing, is that they're approaching it from a product perspective and not saying, this is the problem we are evangelizing, and we just happen to have a solution for that. They are not doing that. Use cases are very vague. If you do your own research on this, it's hard to get really quantifiable, specific use cases where you're like, oh, okay, I get it. That makes a lot of sense. Success stories are non-existent. I couldn't find any that weren't like vendor only, it's like marketing material. Customer return on investment, hard or impossible to determine. Tell you that's a That's a big one right there. So I would not want to be I would not want to be a salesperson on a product that had impossible to determine ROI. Can you imagine that? I mean, that's a difficult conversation to have with a customer when you're asking them to spend a lot of money with you. Long time to value, many months, or in some cases, years. That's just too long. You can't. We move at lightning speed these days. I can't have a payoff years from now, and be comfortable with that. Vendor solutions are expensive. They're pretty proud of them, but they're asking for a lot of money with all these other negatives on them. So it's going to be a hard thing to justify. And then finally, even though we talked about open source and the threat that they have to these market offerings, these are complex. So that's one of the challenges with Kubernetes, right? Is all those other things that you have to stitch together. So yeah, I could have Prometheus and Jaeger and Fluentd and Grafana, but I got to build all that. I got to make it all work together. I got to make sure that I have the intelligence and the insights in there that I need. So that's nothing that I get for free. I got to hire a team like Gap to build that. So that's it's a complex thing. So that's the case against AIOps from my perspective. Okay, last slide before we get to Q&A. What does this mean for Gap? I think Gap should have a strong point of view on candidate areas to use AI to solve specific problems. Evangelize the problem. Maybe we can find a sweet spot. I don't know what that is right now. And a lot of people on this call are smarter than I am. So, just think about that. Is there if we wanted to play in this space, is there some candidate area that we could use artificial intelligence to evangelize the problem? Gap should stay tuned to this market, see if it grows or declines. Just kind of keep attentive to the fact that this is an emerging market, and it could go either direction. I've seen them in my career. Many go both ways, different directions. So just keep an eye out and see if it's picking up or if it's losing steam. And then maybe we change our focus, or we get refocused on what exactly we should do to address these things. Gap should recommend modernizing applications instead of applying AI to legacy systems and environments. I don't know about you all, but I don't, I'm not enthusiastic about working on legacy systems that are 25, 30 years old. There's no fun in that for me. I would do it if I had to earn a paycheck and support my family. But given that, or building modern apps, put me on building modern apps. So I think Gap should recommend, hey, if you're building modern applications, the niche for AI, the role for AI is very limited here, because these things are built in a way that you're not monitoring them like you did traditionally. Gap should encourage customers to spend that budget that would have been on AI ops, creating architectures that don't need this capability. That's a powerful conversation to have with the CTO. I look forward to those. If they start asking me about that, that's what I would recommend. Why don't we build things that don't need that kind of capability? Gap should be prepared to answer customer questions about how they should use AIOps. So I know that this is one of the first steps, is that we all learn more about it. And I'm glad to do this presentation. This is why I volunteered to do this, because I think it's useful for everybody to know. And although I might come across as negative about it in many aspects, it's really about sharing opinions based on experience. But I think when we need to be prepared, especially when we're working at customers for conversations around this as they come up. And last, Gap should determine if there is an AIOps play for our data ingestion accelerator template. So for those of you who aren't aware, transformation services, we're doing some fancy infrastructure as code product development through Terraform code. And the one we're working on right now is a high performant web app on AWS The next one we have teed up is a high-speed data ingestion system. Well, you saw some slides, and that's one of the critical inputs to AIOps. And maybe there's an angle for us to create a play there and to focus on that. I'm not sure. It would require some research and thinking about that. That's it. I thank everyone for coming, and I will hang on the line until all questions have been addressed. So feel free to ask away.
Hey, Dave.
Hey.
Thank you for the presentation.
You're welcome.
What would be like a good next step for us? Maybe that we don't know that much about this topic to follow up, and as you said, being able to answer questions that our clients might ask. Maybe you can point us to some resources on some stuff that we can keep an eye on.
I will create a library of resources that, one, I use to help my research, but two, that are also good reads that in general that I think that would be advantageous if anyone wanted to read them, that would be good. I will create that and send it out.
Awesome, thank you.
Was anybody surprised on my point of view here? Did they expect a more positive thing I would expect?
Yes, but nothing that I think everything made sense after you explained your thoughts behind. So yeah, I think I get your why you said what your position is. So yeah.
As a software engineer, I think most of us are skeptics by nature and have to be proven to, and I'm no exception to that. And so I will say that one of the things that I learned when I was at IBM that I've kind of brought onto Gap a little bit is customers like a strong point of view. And most of the time, whether or not they agree with it or not doesn't matter. It's the fact that you weren't wishy-washy about it, and then you had a strong opinion and that you could back it up. Now, does that mean that I won't entertain diverse opinions on this or really some thought leadership debate? I love that. I've changed my mind. I'm all for that. But I think that having a strong point of view goes a long way, especially when you're dealing with technology leaders and with our customers. Anything else from anybody?
I had another question. I understand like the position for the more software engineering side of things, but what do you think should be the role or the position for data scientists towards AI ops? Uh, it could be specific to Gap, but also in general in the industry. Should we just focus on something more productive for now, or how do we approach it?
I think we focus on something more productive for now while we keep our ear to the ground. And I know that we have a superstar data science team. And if the data science team can figure out any really good use cases for how this can be applied to the operations world, then great. But I know that the candidate scenarios for outside of ops are numerous and plentiful. There's no shortage of those. If they can find one for AI ops, it would be interesting. I don't think we're going to be in a position to create an AI ops tool, but maybe we could create some technology that would be compelling for customers if it solved a specific problem and had a decent time to value that was very short. That would be my recommendation.
Great. I appreciate the insight.
I mean, I think that if I were like head of DevOps team and my boss says, here's your budget for the year, you can spend it on, whatever you want. And I could either get, AWS cloud credits or training for my staff or this or that. or AIOps. I think AIOps would be at the last of my priorities based on the fact that I don't see anything that's really quantifiable in the benefits right now. That could change, but right now I'm not seeing it. And it'd be one thing if, like I said, if IBM was lighting it up with their AIOps product, I would be the first one to say this thing is catching on like wildfire. Customers are using it, and these are the kinds of problems they're solving. But I know for a fact it's not. It's struggling. Anybody have anything else?
Well, from my personal perspective, it is kind of refreshing that you have shared that strong point of view, because I am very skeptical with these kind of systems, and from my experience within various teams, it's like every single time that we have tried one of those solutions, we end up implementing using other technologies the very specific parts that were working and giving some benefit, but then declining on those expensive solutions that at the end of the day was like, well, yeah, you have a lot of nice features, but we ended up using A and B, and we can accomplish A and B by leveraging, I don't know, InfluxDB plus Grafana, or Elasticsearch plus something else, Kibana, for example.
Yep.
So I don't know. It's like, well, maybe in the future, but I think right now it's like I'm still skeptical about it.
Do you all agree that it comes across as they're trying to take advantage and exploit the popularity of AI, even when they have no real AI behind
Yep.
it?
Definitely.
It's crazy. So I'm going to call them out on it, and I will continue to do so. And when someone has real AI in there that solves a specific problem, we'll be back here and I'll give them good marks. But until that, I'm going to continue to be skeptical until I see something worthwhile that's on the market.